This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream. What's up, Wisecrack? Michael here. You may have heard me on our Rick and Morty podcast where, much to my dismay, Jared has dubbed me Dr. Nihilism. I've also written some videos you might recognize, like our Always Sunny episode, the Gaze into the Abyss episode, the Philosophy of Get Out, and more recently, our Kayfabe episode. Today, we're continuing our discussion on the only defense attorney who breaks the law more often than Michael Cohen, Daredevil. Matthew Murdoch's Catholicism has always been a defining element of his character, and has distinguished him from most other non-religious superheroes. But it's in this most recent season that Catholicism comes front and center. To understand Matthew's struggle, and why we think Season 3 is so awesome, we'll have to dive into one of the most important questions that theologians have been struggling with for millennia. So join us as we break down how the man without fear becomes the man without faith in this Wisecrack quick take on Daredevil Season 3. And of course, spoilers ahead. First, a quick recap. Some months after the events of Defenders, but presumably before the children of Thanos double-parked their donut ship in Greenwich Village, Matt Murdock awakens from a coma in the church-run orphanage he was raised in. While the worst of his injuries have healed, his spirit remains broken. Daredevil is convinced that his crusade against injustice had ultimately failed. As such, he takes up residence in the chapel Undercroft, retreating from society and allowing his public persona to remain dead to the world. This makeshift Batcave serves as one of the primary set pieces for the season, and the constant conversations between Murdoch, Father Lantom, and Sister Maggie drive much of the engagement with Matt's Catholic faith, or rather, the lack thereof. Like Lex Luthor in Batman vs Superman, Daredevil is blinded by the problem of evil, which Lex summarizes as,
"If God is all-powerful, he cannot be all good. And if he is all good, then he cannot be all-powerful."
In one scene, Murdoch compares his seemingly senseless suffering to that of Job.
Story of God's perfect servant, Job. He prayed every day at dawn with his knees on the ground, his face in the dirt. Slaughtered 10 goats, one for each of his children, and burned them at the altar in God's honor. Of all God's soldiers, Job, he was the most loyal.
I know the story, Matthew.
Oh, then you know what happens next. God murdered all 10 of his children in cold blood. Scorched every inch of Job's land, lashed at his body till his skin was covered in bloody welts. God rained and misery on the life of his most perfect servant, and still, Job would not curse him. You know what I realized? Job was a pussy.
Matt wonders why God would not similarly speak to him, whether God had really called him to the vocation of vigilante, and whether God had brought about good through the devil of Hell's Kitchen. Unlike the steadfastly faithful Job, Murdoch comes to the conclusion that God is not good.
You might hate God right now, but the feeling is not mutual.
No, I don't hate him. I've just seen his true face is all.
And from the way things are going, it seems like he's not wrong. Throughout the season, more and more evidence mounts for God's indifference. Society seems irredeemably corrupt, entirely under the control of Wilson Fisk. Fisk bribes and blackmails cops, feds, lawyers, judges, and jurists, turning good citizens into criminals, law enforcers into lawbreakers, and the very institutions devoted to justice into instruments of injustice. Given Daredevil's Catholicism, it's apt to recall the words of Jesus. Do not fear those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both body and soul. You know, Fisk in a nutshell. Oh, and we can't not mention the fact that this overweight and ostentatious New York real estate developer, who's basically above the law, suddenly takes up residence in a presidential hotel. Not so subtle, Marvel. Daredevil's newfound misotheism, that is, his anger and frustration at God, amplifies his disgust with humanity.
Thank God for you.
He didn't help you. I did.
He abuses his friends and is generally less interested in saving society than punching it in the face. Murdoch's broken relationships with both God and the people around him can be cast in Catholic terms as a failure to do what Jesus called the 2 greatest commandments: to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. But this itself isn't unique to any specific religion. These 2 relationships represent the 2 basic axes which believers of most religions have to concern themselves with when deciding how to navigate life, especially when sacred and secular duties seem to make different demands. It's here that Matthew directly confronts an issue Christianity has dealt with for centuries. How does one reconcile an obligation to God and an obligation to others especially if those others exist in a tainted, immoral world. Or, in Christian parlance, to be in the world but not of the world. Theologian H. Richard Niebuhr, in his book Christ and Culture, identifies several basic answers that Christians have offered over the centuries for how to do so. And while he's specifically concerned with Christianity, his paradigm would mostly work within any religious tradition. Briefly, they can be called 1. Separation, 2. Accommodation, 3. Synthesis, 4. Paradox, and 5. Transformation. Daredevil's arc in Season 3 sees him transition between two of these models for figuring out our relationship to God and man: separation and synthesis. The former, which Niebuhr also calls Christ against culture, prescribes a radical renunciation of and near total separation from the surrounding society. This is the path ascribed to by monks and Mennonites. It's also exactly what Daredevil does in the early episodes, when, like the rest of us millennials, he moves back home as a grown-ass adult to mooch off his parents, living in their basement and having his mom clean his laundry. Yes, really. And like a medieval monk, he's literally cloistered himself in a church. He treats his identity of Matthew Murdoch as dead to the world, and spurns his friendships with Foggy and Karen. When they find out he's alive, he pushes them away, lies to them, steals from them, and treats them as mere instruments of his agenda as Daredevil.
Has Matt been a shitty friend lately? Without a doubt. But deep down, I think it's hurting him as much as it's hurting us.
His only engagement with the world is when he's punching it with his fist, which is one way to construe being against culture. Niebuhr, while affirming that each of his 5 models was partially correct and at times the appropriate answer, nevertheless was particularly critical of the separation model as overly simplistic and ultimately futile. No one can completely close themselves off to the outside world, as Daredevil discovers the hard way when Bullseye attacks St. Patrick's. It's the turning point of the season, and particularly poignant in its Catholic imagery, all of which make clear to Murdoch that the separation model doesn't succeed in either serving his neighbors or the man upstairs. First, Bullseye's attack is a violation of the long-established norm of sanctuary. Karen Page had sought safety there from the retribution of Wilson Fisk, and by conspiring to murder her there, Kingpin and Bullseye commit a particularly egregious sin in the eyes of Catholics, who see violence on consecrated grounds as profaning something sacred. Then there's the murder itself. Father Lantom sacrifices his own life upon the altar, saving Karen's. His death is an unmistakable allusion to Christ's claim: "I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep." Pastor deriving from the Latin for shepherd. Bullseye's diabolical attack, his violation of sanctuary, and his martyrdom of Father Lantom are all proof positive to Murdoch that his flirtation with Niebuhr's separation model is a failure. It's at this point that he re-embraces the uniquely Catholic way of understanding how to deal with both God and the world, which Niebuhr calls the synthesis model. The synthesis model affirms that both the sacred institution of the church and the secular institutions of society are both means through which God brings about good. That includes the government as a means of bringing about justice. Daredevil's embrace of the separation model in the first half of the season coincided with his disillusionment with the legal system. He'd become convinced that the courts couldn't successfully serve as God's means for enacting justice against criminals such as Fisk. So, when he later reconnects with his friends, and with them uses the legal system to put Kingpin back behind bars, we can see how it's a step towards affirming the synthesis model. Of course, Murdoch's return to the fold doesn't happen all at once, and Daredevil is tempted up until the climactic fight to kill the Kingpin. But whereas in the first season his temptation to finish off Fisk was simply a struggle with the deadly sin of wrath, here it indicates Murdoch is still questioning whether God is using social institutions to bring about good, or whether Daredevil has to take matters into his own hands. At this point, Murdoch has rejected the separationist approach, but it's not until the redemption of Ray Nadim that he once again fully affirms the Catholic approach of synthesis. Since the show's start, Murdoch's core conviction has been that no one was past the point of redemption. Batman has his personal code against killing that's informed by the murder of his parents, but despite sharing a similar origin, the show is clear that Red Batman's scruples came from his Catholic faith. For Murdoch, it'd be immoral to execute his enemies because he held hope that even someone so sinful as Wilson Fisk might have a change of heart and repent. But it's not until this season that a character that had broke bad is shown to go good once again. FBI Special Agent Ray Nadeem is one of the many government officials blackmailed by Fisk. In addition to other crimes, Nadeem is the accomplice to Bullseye's murder of Father Lantom. And yet, he's not beyond redemption. Nadeem agrees to testify against Fisk, knowing full well the danger of crossing his crime boss. And when Fisk gets to the grand jury, making the turncoat's testimony futile, Nadeem, instead of running, voluntarily lays down his life so that his dying deposition would send the Kingpin back to prison. And this is what finally restores Matt Murdoch's faith, seeing God appear to work redemption in human hearts and justice through social institutions, not separately, but in synthesis with one another to bring about good in the world. This is the ultimate example of Niebuhr's synthesis. The vertical relationship to God and the horizontal relationship with man working together. The vertical relationship, aka Nadeem's conscience getting to him, is the thing which allows the horizontal relationship, aka society, including institutions such as the legal system, to be the means by which God brings about justice. The two are working together in synthesis, and without the vertical, the horizontal would have failed. The season ends with Murdoch having come through his crisis of faith. He's no longer sequestered away from society in the church basement, but preaching from the pulpit to his whole community. He's no longer estranged from his friends, but getting the gang back together in the form of Nelson, Murdoch, and Page, attorneys at law. And he's no longer blind to his God's goodness, but trying to see as much of it as possible. Thanks for watching, guys. But before you go, this episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream, an amazing subscription streaming service that offers over 2,000 documentaries and nonfiction titles. CuriosityStream features content made by some of the world's greatest filmmakers, including exclusive originals. It's the perfect way to enhance your knowledge about the complicated world around us, and to impress your friends at dinner parties. CuriosityStream is the go-to streaming service for nonfiction entertainment. If you enjoyed our take on Daredevil's theological undertones, or any of our videos for that matter, then you should definitely check out the CuriosityStream original series, Curious Minds Philosophy. Each episode unpacks a philosophical question and gives some insight into the ideas we often reference here at Wisecrack. What makes CuriosityStream unique is its devotion to fulfilling our lifelong quest to learn, explore, and understand the world. And most of their incredible content is available worldwide on a variety of popular platforms like Roku, Amazon, Apple TV, Xbox One, and more. You can get unlimited access starting at just $2.99 a month. And Wisecrack fans get the first 30 days on CuriosityStream totally free when you sign up at curiositystream.com/Wisecrack and use the promo code Wisecrack. Thanks again. Dr. Nihilism, out.